Hey there, everybody, and welcome back once again. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joy Culpepper, and I'm a part of Culpepper Livestock. So this past weekend, we had an absolutely amazing weekend. Culpepper Livestock, along with Barbell Club Lambs, both of Karnes City, Texas, put on a free lamb and goat showmanship clinic for any child who wanted to attend. And we went over lots of very basic information. The idea behind us putting on this clinic, this is the second year we've done this, was for those kiddos and their families who are pretty new or just getting into showing lambs or goats. We go over lots of very basic information, and then of course we stay after for anybody who wants more in-depth information. We do 30-minute sessions on health and nutrition, fitting, clipping, things you might need in your show box, show day prep, selecting your animal. Then we also talk showmanship, and we break out into really small groups with individual coaches and 4 to 5 kids. And from there, we go over hands-on showmanship practice and show kids different techniques on showmanship, show ring etiquettes, and different things like that. So while everything is nice and fresh on my mind, I thought I would jump in and we would do nutrition and health on a show goat or show lamb. So if you're new to showing lambs or goats, I hope this helps you out. Even if you're not new, I hope this helps you out as well. So I'm going to start off talking about goats. So a goat has an extremely fast metabolism. So because of this fast metabolism on a goat, we need to get condition on them, which condition is fat. They need to have fat cover before we can jump into like our exercise programs and things like that. So when you first get your show goat home, my personal recommendation is a feed that's around 16 to 17% protein. You can even go down to about a 15% and about a 4 to 5% fat. You want to get cover on your goat. Then once they start getting good cover, then we can start either adding in a higher protein lamb feed or a higher protein goat feed. Now, a goat can have a lamb feed, but a lamb cannot have goat feed. And the reason behind this is the copper. Goats can have copper in their diet and they need copper, while sheep can have just a teeny tiny amount or it becomes deadly for them. So just keep that in mind. Now, a sheep, on the other hand, they put cover on or fat a little bit easier than a goat does. So you want to start them off on a little bit higher protein, around 17%, and then between 3 and 4% fat. A lamb, you kind of want to like coast along. You don't want them to get too fat, but you want to keep condition on them, and you're going to pretty much exercise them the whole time that you have them. Where a goat, you've got to get the fat cover on them, and then you start your exercise program, because goats have extremely fast metabolisms. Now for a finishing feed, if your goat has good cover, that's when you can start adding in a lamb feed. You can go to a higher protein, or this is when you can start adding in your supplements that can bump that protein level up. But until you have good cover on your goat, don't have too much protein in their diet, because protein burns fat. Think of bodybuilders. Bodybuilders take in lots of protein because that protein burns fat to get them the look that they want. Same thing with animals. Protein is going to burn fat. So, and that's why on a lamb, we do start them off on a higher protein, because they have a tendency to get fat a little bit easier and a little bit quicker than a goat will. So when you're ready to get to the finishing point of your goat, then you can bump it up to between 17 and 18%, depending on your animal. If they need more cover, I'm going to recommend keeping them at that 16%, give or take protein level. A lamb, you can bump up to even to 18% if they need to really start trimming up towards the end. So we've talked a little bit about grain. Now I'm going to talk briefly about some hay. So I've had a few people tell me, and they were misinformed, that lambs and goats, if they are being fed for show, do not need hay. That is absolutely wrong. Lambs and goats are ruminant animals. They have 4 stomachs: the rumen, the omasum, the abomasum, and the reticulum. In order for those 4 stomachs to properly function, they have to have roughage. So if you have a show goat or a show lamb that is in a confined pen, they're not out grazing, they're not out foraging, they're not out getting the roughage that they need in order for those stomachs to function properly. Now, they don't need a lot of hay. A small handful every other day, or even every other day, is perfectly fine, but they do have to have hay for the roughage in order for those stomachs to work properly and for them to gain properly. So when you think of hay, kind of think of a toothbrush. When they consume the hay and they eat it, it's also kind of helping scrub the insides. It's keeping themselves clean, keeping blockages from building up. It keeps everything functioning and flowing correctly. Now, the hay that we usually recommend, a good fertilized coastal hay is great. If you're in South Texas like us, it's pretty easy to get your hands on that. Works for lambs, works for goats. Sudan is another really good hay, especially if you need to add a little bit more drop to the belly on your show lambs. Works really well. It's part of the hay grazer family. Now, alfalfa. Alfalfa is a great hay, but keep in mind with alfalfa, it is a legume. Legumes are in the family with your clovers. Legumes can and will cause bloat if you are not careful. So if you are considering adding alfalfa to your animal's diet, introduce it slowly, small handfuls at a time. Another thing to keep in mind with alfalfa hay is it is high in protein. So if you are feeding alfalfa and your animal's not gaining weight, it could be because you have way too much protein in their diet and they're just constantly burning that fat off that you're trying to put on them. So for us, we like to feed alfalfa at the end when we're trying to get to our final look. We're wanting to trim them up, get them that final show look. The last month or two, we'll start slowly adding in some alfalfa to give them that nice trimmed, clean look. So you can feed it all year. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with it, but just be conscious that it is higher protein. It can cause bloat. And another thing, as not so much with the sheep, but more with the goats, it can be higher calcium. So there is a chance that if you are feeding wethers, specifically goat wethers, that it can potentially lead to urinary calculi. Now, most urinary calculi is from when your phosphorus to calcium ratio, which needs to be either 2 to 3 parts calcium to 1 part phosphorus. It's when the phosphorus gets above the calcium levels. Most of the stones that are found in the bladders of these goats with urinary calculi are phosphorus, but there is a chance that they could develop calcium stones. So keep that in mind also with alfalfa. Like I said, nothing wrong with alfalfa. Just keep those little things in mind. It can potentially cause bloat. It is going to be higher protein. So if you're trying to get your animal to gain weight, you may want to avoid alfalfa in the beginning and use it more towards the end. And there is a chance it can cause urinary calculi, which is stones in the bladder of your goats. Can happen in sheep. It's more rare. It happens more often in wether goats. Talk a little bit about deworming. Now, if you're feeding out a wether, whether it's a lamb or a goat, they're a terminal animal. So if your breeder advises you to deworm every month, there's nothing wrong with that. They're a terminal animal. Now, if you are, say, leasing a doe or a ewe, or maybe you bought one and you want to hang on to it to potentially raise animals long-term for you to keep, be very cautious with deworming every month. We have found out the hard way that when you deworm every month, you are killing the animal's natural ability to fight off parasites. And we've leased animals to families and we tell them, this is a doe, don't deworm them every month. Check the FAMACHA scores. I will be doing a video on how to check FAMACHA scores to help you guys out also. If the eyelids are nice and dark, the chance of them having parasites is pretty low. And having some parasites in their system is completely normal. So if, you do have a fecal run and they have like 10% or less, that's okay. That's normal. They're going to have some in the gut. But now, obviously, if they get a massive load of parasites, it's going to inhibit weight gain. It's going to inhibit their growth. So if you have a female, a ewe or a doe, be very cautious with doing monthly dewormings, especially if this animal is going back to the breeder or you're going to keep them for the purpose of you raising your own animals down the road. When you deworm too often, you're going to chance building a chemical resistant to dewormers, and it may come to a point where dewormers will no longer work, specific dewormers. And then, like I said before, it inhibits their natural ability to fight off parasites naturally. So if we've leased an animal out, and I can tell right away if they did not follow our directions, because as soon as we turn them loose in the pasture to be a goat for the rest of their life, you know, have babies and things like that, they pretty much fall apart. They lose weight, they can't gain weight, they constantly have worms, parasites. It's a never-ending fight for us. And with over 120 head, we don't deworm every month. I check FAMACHA scores very, very often, but we do not deworm unless it is necessary, either by a low FAMACHA score or a fecal comes up positive with parasites. So we're going to back up a little bit to the feed. This is going to be the same thing if you are planning on retaining a female, whether it is a sheep or a goat. It's a lease animal going back to the breeder, or you're going to keep it for yourself. Look at your feed labels. If your feed says medicated, look even harder. If there is a product called rumenicin or monicin in that feed, get the female off of it unless they're terminal. For your wethers, it's okay, because they're a terminal animal. They're not going to go back into a breeding program. Rumenicin and monicin has lots of very, very negative effects. It can affect fertility. It messes up the lining of the stomach. And when they hit 2 to 3 years old, the lining of the stomach is so messed up that they cannot absorb any nutrients, and it will eventually lead to death. Dicokinate and decox, if those ingredients are in your feed, you're okay. Those are safe to feed. We have switched our feed to that for our young animals, and once they hit about 6 months old, we take them off all medicated feed. So look for rumenicin and monicin. If you are feeding females, make sure that is not in the feed if you have intentions of keeping this animal long term. If you guys have any questions, like I always say, feel free to reach out. I'm going to put some pictures up here at the very end of dewormers that we use here, both for sheep and for goats. It's going to be the dosages, the type of parasite that it works for, whether you can give it to a pregnant animal or not. You can screenshot this if you would like. You guys have any questions, feel free to reach out, comments, message me directly. Like I say, we're always here to help. I hope this helps you guys out, and you guys have a blessed day.